So in January of 2015, Disney lays off hundreds of workers on their IT staff. On a condition of getting their severance package, they were forced to train their H1B replacements. Man, that's kind of dark, isn't it? Similar instances have happened in Southern California Edison, University of California in San Francisco Medical Center, Pfizer. Most recently, FedEx, after being awarded a federal contract worth $2.2 billion, started mass layoffs, while at the same time their H1B applications went from 37 in 2021 to over 430 in 2025. But now we're told that H1Bs don't really hurt the economy, they don't hurt wages, they don't hurt the workforce. They're only there to fill the gaps where we just don't have the workers in the US to take these jobs. But if that's true, why are so many people being laid off? Now, if you've watched my other videos on this channel, you know about my thoughts on immigration as it relates to the economy. It's supply and demand. You increase the supply of something, you devalue it. So if you increase the supply of labor, the value of the labor goes down. Now, this can be somewhat controversial because there are some studies that show it has little to no effect. And then there are other studies that show it absolutely does have an effect. But again, remember in the 60s and 70s, there were tobacco studies that showed that there was no link between smoking and lung cancer. But one of the things I like about the business world is that it's not really up for debate. For example, Morgan Stanley put out a December 2025 report that says companies weren't really affected that badly by inflation, and they were able to avoid the ill effects of it because immigration policies kept labor costs low. They just say the quiet part out loud, because I think most people who read these academic studies don't really read the quarterly and annual reports of financial institutions. But what happens when the narrative is that the supply in critical fields vital to our economy is at or near zero? Special provisions have to be made, and that's where H-1B visas come in. So this rumination is going to be on the H-1B visa problem, what they are, how they work, how they're used, and more importantly, how they're abused. So welcome to Rumination Nation, a little channel where we like to sit around and think about things going on in the world, try to form valid and well-grounded opinions, or maybe lose all hope in the process, but we can be damn sure to try. So don't forget to hit like and subscribe, and let's dive in. H-1B visas are temporary work visas for what the government calls specialty occupations, and these jobs require at least a bachelor's degree in a specific field. Engineers, software developers, computer people, tech people. The idea is kind of simple and reasonable on its face. If a company can't genuinely find an American worker for a specialized role, they can bring in someone from abroad and on a temporary basis. Now, when Congress passed this, they weren't being naive about it, and they saw the obvious problem. They knew that if companies were able to just import cheap labor and undercut everyone, that wouldn't be a good thing. So they built in this protection. When an employer applies for an H-1B, they have to sign a federal document, a labor condition application, and they got to swear to the Department of Labor that they'll pay the foreign worker the higher of two specific numbers. The first number is the prevailing wage. That's the market average for a specific job in a specific geographic area. The second number is what the actual wage is. That's what companies are actually paying these people in that area. And now the rule is, whichever one of those numbers is higher is the one that they have to meet. That becomes their minimum. That's the least they can pay that person, which in theory is actually pretty good, if and only if there are no American workers already in the country willing and ready to take that job. And if and only if that's actually what they pay the H-1B holder. If that number is the minimum, it actually stabilizes or raises wages in a free market system. So if no Americans exist who can do this job, fine, but you got to pay the market rate. Companies aren't allowed to manufacture a labor shortage and then use it to drive wages down. So that's the law, that's what's on paper. The problem is that while that's what's on paper and that's how it's supposed to go, that's not really what happens in practice. So you have HCL Technologies, that's India's third largest outsourcing firm. In 2020, they pulled in $11 billion in revenue, and over $7 billion of that came from their US operations. You may not have heard of them, but if you work in tech or finance or healthcare or any big industry with an IT department, your company's probably used them. So in 2020, there's this whistleblower lawsuit and some documents come to light, and they were never supposed to come to light. What it showed wasn't sloppy bookkeeping or a compliance oversight. It showed underpaying H-1B holders was a deliberate corporate strategy that they thought through, documented, and optimized and built their entire business around. So HCL had a specific metric called citizens versus landed ARC, which is the wage gap. It's a difference between what they have to pay an American and what they could pay an H-1B worker they brought in from India, which is what they call the landed worker. So these internal documents explicitly show that the company was targeting jobs where the gap was the widest, hunting them down and building their visa application around it, optimizing for the biggest possible gap between what Americans make and what they could get away with paying foreign workers. So for Oracle database experts, that's a highly technical, specialized IT role. And HCL's own internal table showed U.S. citizens doing that job were paid $140,000 a year. The landed H-1B worker brought over from India to sit at the same desk and do the same job, they were making $85,000. So that's a $55,000 difference per person per year. So what about the law? If the prevailing wage is $140,000, then that's a minimum that they have to pay. That's what the federal document they signed said they have to pay. The lawsuit alleges that they paid the lower prevailing wage instead. That's the geographic market average, which is dramatically lower than their own internal pay scale, and pocketed the $55,000 difference, and of course passed some of those savings on to the company. The Economic Policy Institute ran the numbers and estimated the total alleged underpayment was $95 million per year. That's at one company. A huge chunk of that $95 million a year would have gone to American workers, American citizens who did what they were told to do: go to college, learn to code. Instead, they graduate with massive amounts of debt that they'll carry around with them for the rest of their lives, and they're dropped into a job market that doesn't want them because they cost too much. And this $95 million a year is just one company. Now, I understand you might be saying, how can they do this? They signed a document, they promised, they pinky swore that they wouldn't do that. The answer to that is in the job descriptions. And what they ended up handing to the government, Department of Labor, has a 4-tiered prevailing wage system, with 4 being the highest. So say a client needs a senior software engineer to architect a Java-based operating system, manage a local team of developers, and solve complex software bugs with zero oversight. I don't know what that means. I don't know what any of that shit means. Anyway, that's apparently a level 4, meaning fully competent. HCL's visa filing for that job had the code for just computer programmer and selected level 1 as entry level. They argued that the worker was merely following basic instructions and performing routine coding tasks under supervision. So I guess it's kind of like a heart surgeon doing open heart surgery in a hospital. For that surgeon and their training and their years of education, it's a routine. Since they're doing it in a hospital, they're also kind of supervised, I guess, right? So the descriptions are all relative. Yeah, relative. This changing of the job description meant that level 4 workers could be paid 50 to 70% less of what the American was making. So these internal documents explicitly state their H1B nominations were carefully constructed around these wage gaps, and they're systematically gaming the system. Now you might be asking how they get away with this. They sign the document, and there's an entire agency enforcing labor laws. So why is there a multi-billion-dollar company able to run a $95 million a year wage theft operation without anyone stopping them? Well, that's because the Department of Labor operates almost entirely on a complaint-driven enforcement system. They don't go around looking for problems, and they don't audit H1B applications and then cross-reference them with, a company's payroll data. They wait for someone to file a complaint, and until that complaint gets filed, they assume that everything's working as it should. But now think about what filing a complaint means for the H1B worker. Their legal right to live in this country is tied directly to their employer. It's not tied to the country, not to the job, not to the field. It's tied to that specific employer. So if they complain about wages and get fired, they don't just lose their paycheck, they lose their visa, and they have to leave, and their family has to leave along with them. So you don't get a whole lot of people filing complaints. And on top of that, there's a 12-month statute of limitations on enforcing labor condition application violations. So if someone does file a complaint, there's a pretty short window for the time when anything can be done about it. Now, in HCL's lawsuit, the only reason these documents came to light was because they were part of another lawsuit, and they got caught by a regulator doing their job. But there's another aspect to this, and we should go a little bit deeper. So HCL is underpaying people and recategorizing their skills, but the outsourcing model goes a little further than that. Because under H1B statute, there's another safeguard. An employer filing for a visa has to attest that bringing in that worker won't adversely affect wages and working conditions of similarly employed U.S. workers. So you can't just fire your American IT department and replace them with cheaper H1B workers. That's a textbook adverse effect, and that's illegal, except for a little kind of shell game that they like to play. And that's kind of what they did in Disney. So at Disney, hundreds of U.S. IT workers are laid off. And as a condition of getting any severance, all those workers had to sit and train their new H1B replacements. They're cheaper H1B replacements that technically shouldn't really need any training at all. The company providing those replacements was HCL. Now you might be wondering, how is this legal? Well, here's the thing. Disney doesn't file the applications because they aren't the employer. HCL is the official employer of record. When the Department of Labor investigates, they look at HCL's existing U.S. workforce. The company that laid off the workers is Disney, not HCL. So as far as the Department of Labor is concerned, they aren't employed by the same company, and nobody violated the adverse effect rule. Disney isn't on the visa, and HCL isn't responsible for Disney's employees. Like if a hospital contracts its cafeteria staff to a third-party specialty contractor, so it doesn't have to pay the kitchen staff a living wage and provide benefits. The hospital gets all the benefits of cheaper labor, staff wears a different company's logo, and the hospital has zero responsibility for their working conditions or their pay because they don't employ them. The same thing happened at Southern California of Edison. Same playbook, IT department, American workers laid off, severance packages held in ransom to train their replacements, and bye-bye. These aren't isolated incidents. This is a business model that's going on in the country, and has been for decades. People who study labor markets call this fissuring. The direct employment relationship between a company and its employees gets fractured. Jobs get broken off, they get outsourced, and they're converted to lower paid, less secure work managed by third parties. And once this process takes hold across an entire sector, wages don't just fall for the people directly affected, the floor drops out from under the entire industry. Now, maybe you're thinking to yourself, this is just one bad apple. HCL is just a bad actor. We're spoiling the whole bunch. Well, in the fiscal year 2015, the same year as the leaked HCL documents, 8 of the 10 H1B employers in the US used an outsourcing business model. That's 8 out of 10. We're talking key players in the industry: Cognizant, Infosys, Tata Consulting Services, Wipro, Accenture. The overwhelming majority of companies filing for H1Bs are outsourcing contractors running the same model, the same scheme. The salary data shows those outsourcing firms average paying their workers $69,000 to $82,000 a year, while Microsoft and Google, the other two names in the top 10 list, are paying their H1Bs $121,000 to $131,000 a year. An EPI report showed Google paid its H1Bs 89% more than Tata Consultancy Services paid theirs. Tata Consultancy. Is the name of the company really Tata Consultancy? Maybe, I don't know. But anyway, same visa, same program. So you do have some companies that are genuinely filling roles they can't find people for and recruiting specialized talent that they want to keep. That's the program working as it was intended, but it only makes up a fraction, while these outsourcing companies are using it for labor arbitrage, finding the cheapest warm body to fill a role at a client company. Right now, Americans with computer science degrees, engineering degrees, IT credentials, the exact same fields H-1B programs are supposedly filling because we don't have enough Americans doing them. They have some of the highest unemployment rates of any professional sector. So the jobs exist, the people exist, they're just not getting hired because these outsourcing firms come in with workers that they control and a worker who can't leave without losing their visa, a worker who on average is making $55,000 or less than the American would be making. That's not a labor shortage, that's a price advantage and a labor market that's been fissured by decades of this model. And the wages that got suppressed don't automatically recover overnight. The damage compounds. And we wonder why wages and incomes have stagnated and even backtracked over the last 50 years. And the people defending the system the loudest are the ones who will tell you to your face that they believe in American workers and American wages and protecting the middle class, as long as none of that requires them doing anything to inconvenience their donors or hurt their bottom line. And this is in both parties, and I can't stress that enough. The Democrats frame any reform as anti-immigrant, nowadays at least, and Republicans talk about America first and their donors cut them a check and suddenly H-1Bs are actually a really good thing. They say we have protections in place, don't worry about it. So the donor class benefits from cheap, legally tethered labor. The workers, both American and foreign, absorb the cost. But you got to remember, it cascades into entire sectors and the entire economy and the entire country. So how do you fix this? Well, it's going to take a lot of political will, and most politicians don't have that. You have to close the outsourcing loop and have a client company co-sign the labor application, so they're on the hook too. If they benefit from the labor, they got to be responsible for the wages. And you could also replace the lottery system. Right now, H-1Bs are given out through a random lottery, and outsourcing firms flood the system to maximize their chances. You replace that with a simple ranking system where the highest paid jobs get the visas. If you're really looking for specialized talent, you can afford to pay it. But for these places that are basically running a labor arbitrage scheme, the math stops mathing suddenly. And then the free market can take it from there. We had some people in office who really cared about the country and who cared about the economy and cared about the people voting for them. They would probably implement these things, and then we might actually find out that the labor shortage is much smaller than we initially thought. You could also institute proactive enforcement. Department of Labor has the authority to launch investigations based on reasonable cause without waiting for a complaint. So you got documented evidence of a systemic underpayment of hundreds of millions of dollars per year in 8 out of 10 of the top H-1B employers. And I think that might constitute a reasonable cause. I mean, at the end of the day, this is something that has to be done. We need to start talking about it openly and honestly and not allow anyone to shut it down by merely claiming the conversation is racist or xenophobic. That trick can't work anymore. If we want to see the country as we know it survive and thrive and see wages and incomes grow, something has to be done. In 2015, the middle class slipped from being the majority of the country. So we're headed toward a society made up of 3 classes. You got the top 1% ultra-wealthy billionaires, then you got the top 9% professional rich, and the bottom 90% working and fighting every day just to survive. H-1Bs aren't the only factor in this, but make no mistake, they are a part of it. And don't let anyone tell you different. So any step acknowledging that the system is flawed, which it definitely is a step in the right direction. And it's something that we have to ask of our political leaders right now. Don't be fooled by the algorithm telling you, oh no, H-1Bs are great. They're just for workers who, we don't have, and they help immigrants and people around the world come to America and have better lives. That's not really the case. because the system as it is now, it takes advantage of those workers, and we don't need them in the first place because we have unemployed people with college degrees and thousands, tens of thousands of dollars, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars of student debt. So anyway, that's what I got on H1Bs. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe and tell me what you think in the comments. And tell me what your experiences are with H1B visas, if you've been affected by them or you know anyone who has.